What is up, everyone? Welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on this console table. It's a contemporary piece, but it has some very traditional aspects to it, and I was inspired by that to really push this into a more antique style. It's in great shape overall, maybe needs a few repairs like that drawer slide. Let's go ahead and get started. For the top, I do want to keep it as wood because this veneer pattern is pretty interesting. So I'm going to start with some chemical stripper just to help me a little bit with the stripping process so I don't have to use my sander too aggressively and burn through this, what is most likely some very thin veneer. I am going to be painting most of the piece in an antique kind of Swedish Gustavian French country style, but I want to save this top because I like the wood grain in this veneer, and I think the stain choice that you'll see I choose will really help to enhance the style I'm going for. After giving everything a nice wipe down with some lacquer thinner and allowing the top to dry out, I'm coming back with my sander to get this top nice and smooth and get all the rest of any residual residue of the finish off. For grits, I'm going to be starting at 120 and then moving up to 180. After sanding, I like to give everything a wipe down with some denatured alcohol to remove all the sanding dust and make sure I have a nice clean surface. You can also dilute this with water, but I do like the straight alcohol just because it evaporates quickly and I can move on. This also gives us a look at the color of the wood. If I were to just seal it right now, and this looks like an oak veneer or something similar. It's got a yellow look to it, so I'll probably be staining this. Next, to prep for painting, I will give everything a scuff sand. I'm probably using like a 220 grit, just a higher grit, to just roughen up the surface, give the paint something to hold on to. Not really trying to break through the surface, but if I do, it's not a huge deal. For stain, I'm using Varathane's Roanoke in their quick dry oil-based formula. I like this color because I'm going for like a weathered, like aged wood look. So this is kind of a grayish toned brown, and so I thought this would work nicely. And I wasn't super happy with this. Obviously, it came out a little splotchy, so I'm gonna pivot and think on this. For the style that I'm going for, a lot of times you'll see a lot of detailed sort of reading or fluting details on these types of pieces, and so that's what I want to do with the drawer fronts on this piece, is to add some of that detail. And so I bought some trim that I'm going to use, and in order to figure out how long I need to cut each piece, I'm using a piece of painter's tape just to sit in this space and then cutting it so that I can use that to measure. Next, I'll use this piece of board to set my saw at the correct measurement for what I need, and so then I can just set everything up as an assembly line and make the cuts one after the other. So I made the cut, and now I just want to test to make sure I've got the right size, and of course it's not perfect on the first try, so I'll just eyeball and shave off a tiny bit more and see if that worked. This is the trim that I decided to use, and so now that I've set up my saw, I can just cut them one after the other and knock them all out. Before I adhere them, I just want to test it out, make sure they all fit, and if I need to make any trims. Now that I know how many I need, I'll go ahead and prep these drawer fronts for the adhesive. First step I want to do is to just give a light scuff sand and then clean them off before applying the glue and then adhering the trim pieces. To adhere them, I'm using liquid nails, and this should be enough to keep them in place pretty securely. I'm not going to use any nails or anything I don't want to deal with filling in all the little pinholes, but I do just want to make sure I have enough glue for them all to stick. I do want to wipe out any of the excess glue, squeeze out, but I'm not too worried about getting it perfect. The paint technique I'm going to be using, there will be a good amount of texture, so it's not that crucial. After letting those set for a couple hours to make sure they're nice and secure, I'm coming in with this 123 water-based primer over the whole console table in the areas where I'm going to be applying the antique look to. And I chose this primer just because it's convenient in the rattle can and it dries really quickly, so you can go ahead and move on with your project faster. The paint technique I'm going to be using uses chalk paint, and so I've got a few different colors here that I'm going to be layering and mixing, and the goal is to make the piece look like it's really old, it's been painted several times, and so I'm just starting with this darker color, and I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit with the white. But once I get this mixed up, I'll apply this as my first layer. I'll use a gray for my second layer, and then the third layer will be the final color that includes a little add-in to give some texture, and we'll get to that in a moment. But that is basically the process. What makes this technique so easy and accessible is that you don't need any special equipment other than a nice paintbrush. I'm using a zebra oval brush here. This allows me to really hold a lot of paint and also stipple in really well into all these different cracks and crevices that we've got going on in this piece. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to apply this paint color to the entire piece. After letting that dry for a few hours, I'm coming in with my next color, which is Parisian Gray. And here it is all covered in the gray, and you'll see the top I ended up sanding back and then cutting through the veneer. And so I'm pivoting. I'm going to be painting the top, but in a way that you might not expect. So I hope you'll stick around and see how this turns out. Unlike the body of the piece though, I want the top to be super smooth, and with this veneer, especially around the edge decoration, there is a lot of texture in the grain, and so I'm just using some DAP wood filler that I've watered down just slightly, and I'm just applying this and working it down into the grain. After I let this dry, I will sand it back nice and smooth. When sanding back for grain filling, I've found out from others on YouTube and my own experience that you do want to see a little bit of the haze still visible from your wood filler over the surface. This means that you haven't sanded all of it away, and some will stay retained within the grain. This is especially important when you're filling grain because of such shallow areas that you're filling. With bigger holes, it's not that big of a deal, and you probably won't sand all of it out. But with these very shallow cracks, I do recommend just a light hand. You obviously want it level and smooth, but you still want to see a little bit of that wood filler. And to seal it in, I'm just using the same primer that I used on the base of the console. And what am I going to do with the top? I have decided to try a faux marble look on this. I think that will complement sort of the old world style that I'm going for. And so I'm doing this with paint, chalk paint, and I have seen a bunch of YouTube videos on this, trying to figure out my approach. And I think I'm going to be merging a few techniques from different places. But the first step is to give the primed surface a coat of white chalk paint. So I'll go ahead and apply this with the brush and then sand back any brush strokes. Obviously for this, with a marble look, it needs to be very smooth on the top, and so I'll just make sure I get all those ridges or any kind of nibs or dust that settled while it was drying, and get a nice smooth surface. And then, very important, you want to seal this first layer in. You're going to be using a lot of wet techniques for the marbling, and so you don't want to reactivate this first base layer of chalk paint. So you can use whatever sealer you'd like to seal in this first layer. I actually ended up removing the top. It was just a couple of screws, and bringing it inside. Next step is to apply another layer over your sealed surface of the same white paint, and then you come in with different colors, mixing them, blending them, adding veining, blending it out until you kind of end up with a look that you're happy with. And so it involves, a lot of just feel. It is a trust the process sort of thing. And I like marbles that are a little creamier and subtle on the colors, and the lighter gray veining with very, thin, maybe dark, sparse, detailed veining areas, but nothing too dramatic. I just want this to look nice and soft. And so again, I'm just laying down the paint and doing it by feel. I'm going to have a few sort of areas that kind of go diagonally across the top, and I'm not going to really explain every single step in this process because it is a lot. So if you're interested in hearing more about how I did this, just let me know and I can work on something here. But I'm going to speed this up and just let you enjoy the process. For my final paint layer, I'm using this salt wash additive to the paint. So I'm using chalk paint. It gives you the recipe for how much paint to how much salt wash you need. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and mix this up. I do think this is kind of more like also like a feel situation, because I'm using a couple different blues, first of all, that I'm gonna mix together with the gray. But while I do that, I'll tell you, I did end up going by feel on this. I made the recipe as it said, but it didn't look as textured as I wanted it to, so I just kept mixing it. I ended up just mixing in the whole can. But I do think it's kind of subjective. I don't think it's has to be a certain way. I think you can experiment with this stuff and get the look that you're going for. So it's pretty simple. You just measure out your paint and then you add in, the salt wash to the level that it says, and then mix it up, and that's pretty much it. But it just seemed a little thin. I was looking for a thicker consistency, and so I just kept adding and adding until it got to where I was looking for. One note on this as well, usually you would have added the salt wash to the layer just before your final color. I misread the instructions, and so I didn't do that, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Again, I think it's pretty forgiving. You can kind of work with it however you want, but just so you know, that would be the typical way you'd see it done. But anyway, so in order to apply it, I'm just using the same brush that I've been using, the oval zebra brush, and just kind of dabbing it, stippling it on there. I want to keep a good bit of texture, and then what you'll do is come back and sort of knock some of it down after it kind of dries just slightly, and that gives you sort of this crusty old style finish that I am going for. So here's a look at that second step. Once it's dried for 30 minutes to an hour, you can come back with a dry brush and just knock back some of the areas that have a lot of it globbed on there. It just kind of smooths it out a little bit, but it still leaves some texture that, once everything is dry, looks really nice. One of the drawer glide contraptions was broken, and so I was able to find this exact one on Amazon, so I just bought a replacement. So here I am, just removing the broken one and replacing it with the new one. And next I will go ahead and just reinstall the top to the piece. Like I said, it was just screwed on in a bunch of different areas, and so I'll just go ahead and get that secured back on the base. So the next step is to sort of introduce this distressing, where you can reveal some of the layers of color that you've put below this top color. And so you can do this in a variety of ways. Right now I'm trying out with just some sandpaper in areas where, you know, it's natural that you think like something would hit it, or your hands would rub away the paint over, you know, time. And so, like I said, you can use sandpaper. You can, with the chalk paint, since it's reactivated with water, you can, you know, mist the surface down and then use a paper towel to sort of rub away at the paint to give it that look. And it just gives an aged, natural look to it, a lot of dimension, which I think looks really nice. am going to be using new hardware on this piece. As I mentioned, the ones that came with it were very modern looking to me and just didn't fit. And so I'm using my hardware jig just to measure out and mark for drilling. I didn't film it, but I started using some dark wax, as you can see, around the places where I put hardware. And then I just felt like it was still missing something. And so, upon more research, I found this whitewashing technique where you water down the paint very, very well and then apply it to your piece. It feels crazy to put this on top of your final color. But once you put it on and then mist it down, make sure it's really wet, then you come back and wipe it back, and what it leaves looks just so cool. It's like just adding all of this additional age to it, and I think this ended up really bringing it all together, and it was very messy, but worth it. All right, let's step back and look at the before. This piece was fine, pretty contemporary, but I wanted to bring it back in age, and this is where we ended up. So I did end up adding some dark wax and clear wax to seal everything. I didn't record that, but I love the texture. I think this top turned out as well as I could have hoped for my first try, and overall, I thought that this was quite the transformation. I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments if you liked the before, the after. What do you think of this sort of style? And that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.